Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we begin today with verse 173. As you know, today is according to the lunar calendar, it's the Guru Purnima, and it's the day we remember all our gurus, and it's very auspicious that on this day we get a chance to study this text by Shankaracharya. He falls in the same lineage. So to remember him and to pay our tributes to him, the best way, there are these 5 sacrifices mentioned in the scriptures, 5 ways of worship, which are recommended for all the faithful. And one of them is called the Rishi Yajna. And the Rishi Yajna means paying tribute to all these great rishis, the great sages. And the best way of paying tribute to them is to read and learn from their compositions. So every Wednesday, what we do is not just study a text, but it's a way of worshipping and remembering this great one, because it is the knowledge that they intuited, the knowledge that they realized, that they have passed on to their students, and their students have passed on to their students. So it is from one generation to the next. This great insights that we are studying have been passed on, the lamp of light, the lamp of knowledge. And that's what we are doing. And it's not necessary that every one of us start doing formal classes in our own turn. But what we study and what we learn, even if we internalize the teachings, if it forms a part of our life, if we start living according to that, if our mind starts thinking along those lines, then all the interactions we have with other people, whether it's our family or friends, our interaction with other people will be colored, will be informed, will be influenced by what we are studying. So that's the way, oftentimes, these insights will be passed on from one generation to the next, not necessarily always in this formal teacher-student relationship, but it can also happen informally. It can happen almost unconsciously. Because that's what we do in any kind of conversations we have, in any kind of interactions we have. We are sharing our thoughts and ideas. And our thoughts and ideas come from various sources. And among the many sources for devotees is the study that we do. So that's how we see how this knowledge is passed on formally or informally from one generation to another. So presently we are studying the layer of the mind. In the earlier verse on 172, we read this: the bondage is imagined by the mind, and freedom is also imagined by the mind, just as a cloud is brought by the wind and is also carried away by the wind. We saw this last time. So this idea now is further elaborated, further described in the verse that we will do now. 173. Dehadi sarva vishaye parikalpya ragam badhnati tena purusham pashuvat gunena vairasya matra vishavat suvidhaya pakshchat enam vimochayati tan mana eva bandhat. Generating attachment to the body and all sense objects, the mind binds a person the way a rope binds an animal. It is the mind again that frees the person from the bondage by generating an aversion for them all as if they were poison. So that is what the mind does. All the mischief really begins with attachment. You might remember those two verses in the second chapter of the Gita. I believe they are 62 and 63. How it all begins with attachment. The mind is thinking about some object or some person, some place, and then that whole chain reaction starts. Once the mind is immersed in thinking of something or someone, the mind gets attached to it. Once the mind gets attached to it, desire is generated, either to want it or to run away from it. If there is any obstacle in fulfilling that desire, it leads to anger. If it leads to anger, then a person forgets what needs to be done or what cannot be done. And then what the books goes on to say, the Gita says, leads to loss of memory. Well, loss of memory is meant that at that point I don't know what is the right thing to do. I forget even things that I know, I forget at that moment. And that's when all the mistakes occur. Most of the mistakes we make in life don't occur because we don't know what's the right thing to do. Because if we make a mistake without knowing it, without knowing the right thing, then it's still a mistake. We might still suffer its consequences, but that's understandable. I didn't know what the right thing was. But if we look at the mistakes we make in life, we will see that probably the majority of the mistakes we do, we actually knew exactly what should be done, what shouldn't be done. But that moment, we forgot. Kind of a momentary loss of memory. And then we do something stupid, and then we say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have thought that way. And so that is what the layer of the mind does. The mind binds a person the way a rope binds an animal. It all starts with attachment. But it's the mind again that frees the person as well. So the mind does both the functions. It can bind as well as it can free us. And that's why the Gita also says the mind can be our friend, the mind can be our enemy. The example that often comes to mind is that of a well-trained pet and an untrained pet. Having a dog it's great fun. But if the dog is not trained, if the dog does whatever the dog wants at any time of the day or night, then how long can you tolerate it? Then you will never have peace. But if a dog which is well trained can bring so much joy, a mind is like that kind of a dog. If we train the mind well, the mind can bring us not only joy, it can free us from this samsara. But an untrained mind, an undisciplined mind, can be a constant source of pain. And the problem with mind is, at least if we're just thinking about a dog, if the dog is really beyond repair, I was about to say. Well, if you find there is no way you can make the dog all right, there is at least a way. You go and put it back in a rescue shelter or something, or offer it to someone who is very eager to have a pet, especially someone you don't like. But what you do with the mind? You can't give away the mind to anyone. That's with us, whether we like it or not. So the mind really needs a lot of care because we cannot give it away if it's troublesome. So that's what we do. If we have to live with someone, whether we like it or not, it's good to make that someone a friend so that our life becomes easier. And our mind is someone we have to live with. We cannot lend it to anyone. We cannot get a new mind from anyone. This is the mind we have. Whether you like it or not, you're going to stick with it. And therefore, making the mind a friend is very important. So a mind that is an enemy will bind us. A mind that has been made into a good friend will free us. Verse 174. Tasman manaf karanamasya jantoho bandhasya mokshasya chava vidhane bandhasya hetur malinam rajo gunaihi mokshasya shuddham virajastamaskam. Therefore, it is the mind that is the cause of generating both bondage and freedom from all beings. The impure mind filled with elements of rajas is the cause of bondage, and the pure mind free from rajas and tamas is the cause of freedom. And how the mind can be made pure will be described in the following verses. Verse 175. Viveka vairagya gunatirekat shuddhatvam asadya mano vimuktiyai bhavatyato buddhimato mumukshoho tabhyam dridhabhyam bhavitavyam agre. Acquiring purity through intense discernment and detachment, the mind becomes the cause of freedom. Therefore, the wise person who longs for freedom must first strengthen these two. Viveka and Vairagya. Discernment. Viveka is actually in the title of the book itself. We have seen that among the 4 primary disciplines for a Vedanta student, discernment always comes first. And Viveka or discernment involves looking deeply into every experience, every thought, every word that we speak, every object that we see, every person that we meet. Not take anything lightly, not live in a superficial way. So when Viveka and Vairagya, discernment and detachment are strong, then the mind becomes pure, and that pure mind leads to freedom. It's easy to see why discernment and detachment lead to purity, because what makes the mind impure is indiscriminate attachment, indiscriminate ways of dealing with the things in the world. But discernment, Viveka, helps us to look at everything very deeply, ask ourselves whether my dealing with this object will help me become stronger or weaker. That was a very simple and easy method that Swami Vivekananda gave us all. And that is, anything that makes us strong, either physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, say yes to it. Anything that makes us weak in any of these ways, say no to it. And that really helps us take good decisions, because sometimes we have a dilemma. Should I choose this or should I choose that? And therefore, at that time, with a calm mind, if I look deeply into that thing and say, will thinking this way, will doing this activity, will it go to make me stronger or weaker in any of these different ways? And if the answer is stronger, say yes. If the answer is weaker, say no. But in order to make this judgment, we need both discernment as well as detachment. Why do we need detachment? Because if I'm able to discern that something, yeah, this is going to make me weak, but yet I don't have detachment, I have so much attachment to it that I will still go and embrace it, even when I know it is going to weaken me in some way. And that is why discernment, viveka, must always be accompanied by detachment or vairagya. And that is how both these lead to purity. Purity and freedom are intimately related. Because oftentimes the word meaning become like, what is purity really? And a simple way, and probably a very practical way to understand the meaning of purity is whatever affects my spontaneity, whatever limits me in some way, whatever impinges upon my consciousness in an adverse way, that is what makes me sort of impure. But purity, that's why purity is equated with freedom. We can see that I have some glimpse into what purity means when we look at a little baby, for instance. One of the things that very little children are, we can see it manifest in their life, is that spontaneity. They don't have anything to hide. They don't have any kind of inner censors. They are able to express themselves freely. But when we grow up, we develop all these different filters. We just feel, oh, this is what I shouldn't say here, or if I say this, this person will think this way. So all these calculations come to our mind, and that is what clouds our mind. We are not able to express ourselves freely, because there's always seem to be some barriers, internal or external. You remember that story of Ramakrishna, how a friend goes to meet her friend, and there she sees that the friend is working with these doing some knitting or something with some threads, and so this friend is very tempted to steal one of these, the roll of very precious thread. And so what she does is she asks the friend, could you please give me a glass of water? And when the friend goes into a different room, she takes this ball of thread, and then she doesn't have any place to hide it, so she hides it under her armpit. And then she thought she'll go out and then no one will know. So the friend returns with a glass of water and quickly notices that the thread is missing. And so rather than accusing a friend of stealing or something, so she just says, hey friend, come on, let's dance. And so the host starts dancing with both hands raised. But the friend who is hiding that thing under her armpit, she cannot raise her hand because otherwise they'll know. So she just keeps one hand down, and with one hand she starts dancing. And then the friend says, why don't you raise both your hands and dance? And then she said, no, I can only dance with one hand up. And Ramakrishna mentions this story to show how many limitations we live with in our daily life. There are there are things we just cannot do because of internal or external pressures of different kinds. And that is really what clouds us. Clouds are expression of freedom. And so purity, therefore, is intimately connected with freedom. Once there is nothing inhibiting me, obstructing me, I'm able to express myself fully with both hands raised, then that is freedom. And that is how purity and freedom are connected. Verse 176. Mano nama mahavyagro vishayaranya bhumishu charatyatra nagachantu sadhavo ye mumukshavaha. The mind is a fierce tiger prowling in the forest of the sensual world. Spiritual seekers who long for freedom should keep away from it. Keep away from it means keep away from the sensual world. Now the question will come, we are only living in the world. The world is surrounding us all the time. How can you live away from the world? Where will we go? People think of going to mountaintops, going to the Himalayas, going to deep inside the desert, going inside some cave. No matter where we go, it's still a part of the world. How can we then get away from this forest of the sensual world? And the simple answer is by divinizing it, by changing it. The way to divinize the world, as the Upanishad says, there is an Upanishad, a very small Upanishad called the Isha Upanishad. It begins by saying, Isha vasyam idam sarvam, which means that, literally it means cover the entire world with God. Isha, with Ishvara. Cover the entire world with God. And of course, if you cover something with something else, then you're only going to see the outer thing. You're not going to see what's inside. Although that's the literal meaning, cover everything with God, the actual meaning, the inner meaning of that is really uncover everything. The idea is we don't have to cover the world with God because God already is present, but covered by the world. So if I can remove the layer of the world, I will see nothing but God. And the best way to do that is just constant self-reminder. For instance, one way to do that is just even to begin the day. As soon as we begin the day, as soon as you wake up, even before you have gotten out of your bed, the first thought your mind should think is your mantra or a prayer. If I can begin the day reminding myself that this whole experience I'm having, what my eyes can see, what my ears can hear, is nothing but the divine. If I can push that thought strongly inside my mind early in the morning, that has a very powerful effect. There are a class of hymns specifically meant for this. They are sometimes called the Pratasmarana Stotra, the hymns for things to be remembered early in the morning. In fact, we have one of these on our website. So if you go to the archives and the prayer section of the center's website, you will see that this Pratasmarana Stotra is there. So beginning a day chanting that, even if you don't do it in the original, just reading the translation and repeating it itself can be a very strong reminder. And then throughout the day, as often as I can, if I can remind myself that this is all filled with the divine, that behind the name and the form is the infinite being. It's just a way of training the mind. That way the mind becomes a friend. Once the mind is trained, then the mind is it's just a creature of habit. Once I train the mind that way, then the mind itself, on its own, will keep on reminding me on all future occasions. So in the beginning, we have to work hard to train the mind. But once that training is done, then life can be a much joyful experience. Verse 177. Manaprasute vishayana sheshan sthulat mana sukshmataya cha bhoktuhu sharira varna shramajati bhedan gunakriya hetu phalani nityam. The mind continually produces for the experiencer innumerable sense objects, gross and subtle, the kinds of species, caste, stage of life, tribe, quality, activity, means, and results. The mind is such a powerful instrument. It can do amazing things. And in a very short verse here, it just describes the extent of the things the mind can do. So first of all, it's continuously producing for us so many objects. Gross and subtle, because in the waking state, we have these tangible objects before us. And subtle, because in the dream state, all of those objects are produced by the mind, are products of the mind, so they are very subtle. So gross and subtle means in the waking state and in the dream state. Species, different kind of species. Sharira means the human species, of course, the different kinds of animals. Then not only that, all of these other celestial species that we can think of, and books and mythologies and religious texts often mention them. In many of these ancient texts, we find one other species called Gandharvas. They are the divine minstrels. And then, of course, there are these citizens of heaven. And then there are, again, gradations among them. So there is the physician in heaven is called Dhanvantari. And the millionaires in heaven are called Kuberas. So all of them have special names. So these different levels of different people. And then, of course, there are many different celestial worlds described, called Chandralok and Suryalok and Brahmalok, and there's no end to it. And then someone asked once, is it really true? Do all these worlds really exist? Do all these different species really exist? Do our Gandharvas really exist? And my answer to that is, who knows? I mean, looking at it purely from a very rational standpoint, if this species is possible, why not that? And who am I to say human beings are okay, animals are okay, but these other celestial species are not okay? Who am I to say okay or not okay? How do I know? If this is possible, then that is possible. If this kind of an existence is possible, who am I to deny that some other kind of existence is possible? I mean, sometimes people ask, how do we know there is rebirth? And the answer is, no, we don't know. But if we have to question rebirth, then to be rational about it, we have to question the birth also. The simple thing is, if it's possible to be born once, how can anyone say it's impossible to be born again? Because sometimes people think that rebirth is some kind of a theory without any proof. But it's good to keep in mind that this single birth is also a theory without any proof. That doesn't have a proof either. And one is free to believe in whatever makes sense to them. But to think that one is kind of an established truth and the other is only a theory, that's not right. So if we question one thing, we will probably have to question the other thing as well. Then caste means varna, often means the trade affiliation. Now it's a big subject, how these varna trade affiliations occurred. We don't have time and we don't need to go too deep into it. But again, I would refer you to the website again on the blog. There was one reflection written some time back. It's titled, I think it's called, What is My Duty? How these different trade affiliations, or what sometimes now popularly called castes, how did they come about? How did it originate? What happened? And what is their connection with the kind of social divisions we find today? And if any of you are interested, take a look at a very brief description that is given in that blog. Then stage of life, ashrama. There are 4 ashramas according to this ancient way of describing it. The student stage, the householder stage, the retired stage, and the hermit stage, called the brahmacharya ashrama, grihastha ashrama, vanaprastha ashrama, and sannyasa ashrama. Tribe is the different social groupings. Activity, kriya, means karma, mean the senses of action, because in order to do any activity, we need hands and feet and all the activity, the senses we require. And the results are, of course, the results of karma. All of these things become possible because of the mind. So the mind is a much more active part of our personality than even the body. The body can be just sitting in one place, but the mind never rests. The only time the mind rests mostly is in deep sleep. But in deep sleep, although we say that the mind completely stops functioning, not to be taken too literally, because even in deep sleep, the mind is like 99% asleep. But a little bit of the mind, even in deep sleep, is vibrating a little bit. There is a movement there. And that is called the ajnana vritti. That movement, that wave. Movement of the mind really means waves in this mind. Mind is often thought of as a lake. And every thought that we think creates a ripple or a wave in that mind. So even in deep sleep, because ignorance is still present, even in deep sleep, that ajnana vritti, there is that slight movement. But in our normal course of the day, the best rest any of us can get is only during that time of deep sleep. Not even when we are dreaming. And dreaming, of course, we are lying down in bed. But if most of the night we are just dreaming, we won't feel refreshed the next morning. But if you had a sufficient amount of deep sleep that night, the next morning will be very restful, you will feel rested. There is one thing that can give us even more rest than deep sleep, and that is good meditation. Because in a perfect meditation, the mind becomes completely still. And therefore, the rest that meditation can give us, even deep sleep cannot do that. And that's why we often see that those who meditate well, their need for regular sleep becomes less. Because the body is able to get so much rest, and the mind can get so much rest in that state of meditation, that it doesn't require then to spend long hours falling asleep. Verse 178. Asangachidrupamamum vimohya dehendriya prana gunairnibaddha aham mameti brahmayatyajasram manasvakrityeshu phalopabhuktishu. The Atman, who is unattached consciousness, is deluded by the mind and bound with the ties of body, senses, and prana, identifying with them as I or mine, and made to wander in order to experience the varied results of its actions. Simple, this is just summarizing the things that we have already saw before. Look at this phrase, unattached consciousness, asanga chit. The Atman is pure consciousness. Sometimes the word pure is used, which means exactly the same thing, unattached or objectless. Normally we think about awareness or consciousness, we always think about the presence of some object. I'm aware of something. I'm conscious of something. But unattached consciousness means consciousness itself. You don't need any object. Consciousness doesn't depend on an object. Yes, consciousness reveals an object. Awareness helps me get knowledge of things. But awareness can also exist by itself. And that is what the Atman is, just awareness. And mind makes them wander, and wander really means in this wheel of samsara. What we said earlier about birth, death, rebirth, or going to the different lokas, going to heaven, hell, and all of these wandering in this samsara is what occurs to experience the varied results of our different karma that we do. 179. Adhyasa doshat purushasya samsritihi adhyasa bandhastvamunaiva kalpitaha rajastamo dosha vato vivekino janmadi dukkhasya nidanametat. A person's fall into samsara occurs due to the error of superimposition, adhyasa. It is the non-discerning person's mind, tainted by rajas and tamas, that conjures up the bondage of superimposition and becomes the cause of suffering due to birth, etc. Look at the word conjures up, kalpitaha. And this idea has come before, that the bondage that is experienced is imagined, it's not real. So the bondage is imagined and the freedom is also imagined. And we might say, well, if the bondage is only imagined, why are we worrying about it? It's not real. True, we really don't have to worry about it, except that even though it is imagined, it feels as if it is real. That's the problem. Otherwise, we don't have to be afraid of the snake. Oh, we can say the snake is only imagined. No, if we know that's an imagination, then of course we won't be afraid of it. But because we don't know it's a rope, although the snake is imagined, it feels very real. The dream world is imagined, but it feels very real when I'm dreaming. So all of this bondage that we have now is imagined, but it feels real. And because the bondage is imagined, the moksha is also imagined. So don't think that the moksha is real. Moksha is as real or as unreal as the bondage. Because a real moksha cannot take away an unreal bondage. It's a little bit like if you are thirsty in your dream, you're not going to say, oh, it's only a dream thirst. It's not real. I don't need water. No, but that time you are going to feel thirsty. You will need water. Now, by the side of your bed, there may be already a glass of water. Unfortunately, in your dream, you are in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And you're dying of thirst. All that you need to do is just extend your arm and drink this glass of water. But this glass of water in the waking state is totally useless to quench that thirst in the dream state. So the dream thirst can only be quenched by dream water, although both are unreal, both are imagined. Similarly, the bondage is imagined, so real freedom cannot remove that imagined bondage. You will need an imaginary freedom to remove the imaginary bondage. Verse 180. Ataprahur mano avidyam panditas tattvadarshinaha yenaiva bhramyate vishwam vayuneva brahmandalam. That is why the wise who perceive the truth say that ignorance is the mind, which alone moves the universe here and there, like the wind which moves masses of clouds. Ignorance is the mind. That's a profound statement, because often we say that the main problem in Vedanta is ignorance. But none of us, or very few of us, were bothering about that ignorance. Our main hurdle, the main problems in life are caused by the way our mind functions, the way our mind creates all the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the images. And the mind is a product of ignorance. And that's why this verse says the mind itself is the ignorance, although it's really the product of ignorance. And it's therefore called the direct cause of samsara. I had quoted earlier, in an earlier class, a statement in an Upanishad called the Amrita Bindu Upanishad, which says, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandhamokshayoho. The mind is the cause of our bondage, and the mind is the cause of our freedom. So a mind which is an enemy, cause of bondage. The mind that we have tamed and made our friend becomes the cause of freedom. You can see what a powerful instrument is there inside us. And we can make it or we can break it. So it's a great responsibility we all have to tame this wild animal called the mind inside our heart. 181. Tanmanashodhanam karyam prayatnena mumukshuna vishuddhe satichai tasmin muktif karaphalayate. One who longs for freedom should make earnest effort to purify the mind. When the mind is purified, freedom becomes as tangible as a fruit in one's hand. This is an analogy that is often mentioned in Vedanta text. Just as if I have an apple or an orange in my hand, I can see it very clearly. I will never doubt its existence because I can see it, I can feel it, I can smell it. It's very, very clear. And so that's what they say. When the mind is purified, I will never have any doubt whether I have attained freedom or not, because it will be as clear as a fruit in my hand. And that's why I often say, someone says, how will I know if I have realized God or not? If I have doubt about it, I have not realized it. That's very clear. 182. Mokshaika satya vishayeshu ragam nirmulya sanyasya cha sarva karma sachraddhaya yashravanadinishto rajasvabhavam sadhunoti buddhehe. Getting rid of attachment to sense objects by single-minded longing for freedom and giving up all work, one who is faithfully devoted to the practice of hearing, etc., destroys the impurities of the mind. Again, all of these things we have seen before. Getting rid of attachment to sense objects. How do we get rid of attachment? And one way to get rid of attachment is to see defects in it. It's like this. If I'm, let's say, if I'm bent on buying something, I said, oh, I want to buy this product. I love it. I want to get it. And let's say a friend of mine wants to persuade me not to buy it. Which will be a good way for that friend to persuade me? All that this friend has to do is to bring me some 5 or 6 reviews and say, read this review. You want to buy that thing? Read these reviews. And if those reviews says, this product is terrible, the customer service is hopeless, and this breaks down in 15 days, and you read that and say, okay, I don't want to buy it. Now, that's the best strategy. Usually it works. So whatever things we are strongly attached to, we can look deeply in those things and say, because what happens is this simply, really, if we are bent on getting something or wanting something, we willfully look at only the positive side of it. We just say the great benefit it will do. And if we don't want something, we'll only look at the negative side of it and say, oh, this is the reason I don't want it. We need not kind of have only one-sided view. Most things in the world are kind of a combination of good and bad. There will be something positive in it, there will be something negative in it. All that I need to do is, do I really need it? Will getting it make me stronger, make me weaker, make me so attached that make me forget the things that I need to do, or it will help me remember the things that I need to do. So we need to have our own inner mechanism of arriving at a decision, because everything in this world, depending on from which angle you look at it, you can see what is good in it, you can also see what is bad in it. But one way to get rid of attachment is to look deeply. That's why again and again we come back to the title of the book, looking deeply. If you look deeply, then you get to see things as they are. In fact, Krishna in the Gita says, not just looking at some product you want to buy. Of course, you should look at it carefully and decide whether you want to get it or not. But we can look at this whole existence itself. This is the one big product, a cosmic product that is around us. And if we look at it deeply, what do we see? And Krishna says in the Gita, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. It's a very direct, clear, unambiguous statement. If we look deeply at this whole experience of every living being, what do we see? Essentially, if we kind of cut through all these superficial details, basically, Janma, Mrityu, we see birth, death. We see things coming into being, things dying, getting destroyed. Jara, aging, things get old, people get old. Vyadhi, illness, things break down. People's health breaks down. The body breaks down. The mind breaks down. That is the reality. No matter you take living objects or non-living objects, Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. And ultimately, all these changes, what do they lead to? Dukkham. It brings pain and suffering in many different ways. And then Krishna says, Dosha Anudarshanam. Dosha means defect. Anudarshanam means looking deeply. Darshanam, seeing, looking. Anudarshanam, looking deeply, we see that this entire creation is defective. Yes, we can get kind of bits and pieces of joy here and there. But if we step back and look at the nature of existence itself, it's defective. So that's the idea here. Because once we are able to see through this mischief, so to speak, then it's very difficult to get attached to it. Then we know that investing my whole being into this perishable, changing world, which can collapse any moment. How much of our time and energy we give to the world? But just think about it this way. Any moment, it is not going to take more than a single moment for this everything to disappear. Once we drop dead, everything is gone. Everything we are attached to, the people, places, things, property, everything can vanish in a moment. And then we have maybe find ourselves in Chandralok or Suryalok or somewhere else. We're not going to remember any of this. Well, we don't remember where we were before we came here. And then we're going to get attached to things there. And then experience some more pain. And then suddenly, in some moment, that disappears. You find yourself in some other lok. Now, are we going to continue like this indefinitely? Well, if someone is like enjoying that, oh, I don't mind it, welcome, go ahead. But if we see, no, I'm just sick of it. This is like a Groundhog Day, just like movie, just going on and on and on. And then we say, how can I get out of it? Is there a way to get out of it? So, but we will know all this only when we look deeply, only when we think. If all the time, if I'm immersed, if all the time I'm busy dealing with this superficial things of daily life, I will not have the time, the privilege, the interest into even like step back and see what's going on in my life. Because we are, if we kind of are so invested into every little detail, we will miss the larger picture. So I'm not saying ignore the details. By all means, everyone has to do that. But find a time, even if it's a few minutes, to step back and look at the larger picture. And our daily practice of prayer and meditation gives us that opportunity to step back and look at it. Because unless we do that, we won't be able to see it. And one other important phrase here, giving up all work. Now, what does giving? Nobody can give up all work. What it means is, I give up the sense of agency. I give up the idea that I'm the one who is doing work. Because that's at the root of all problem. It's not doing work. The work is really being done by the body and the mind. All the work that we do, I mean, when I say I'm doing work, who is actually doing it? When I say I'm drinking water, essentially my body is lifting up this glass and drinking it. Not me, it's just the body. When I say I'm thinking something, I'm not doing it. It's the mind that is doing the thinking. So my senses, my body, my mind, they are doing work. They can do whatever they want. Who cares? Well, we care because we think they are me. Now, if I can somehow convince myself, no, I'm just the witness, then I'm not doing any work. I'm just watching my body and mind do things. Admittedly, yes, it's difficult. It's kind of nice as an intellectual exercise. But if I can find that leisure, even for a few minutes every day, to step back and see, okay, now, yes, I cannot be a witness 24/7, but can I be a witness for 30 seconds? Even if I can be just a witness of everything for 30 seconds, and if I can really do it well, that's already a very good step. Because if I can do it for 30 seconds, with a little bit of more practice, I might be able to do it for a minute. Maybe after a few months, I might be able to do it for 5 minutes. But that's the way to go. It's not that, well, just miraculously someday I'm going to be free. No, we won't. If we don't do something consciously about it, we are going to go in this wheel of samsara indefinitely. The wheel has no beginning and no end. So if we want to get out of it, we have to take a very conscious decision and work hard for it. It won't happen by itself. (183) Manomayo napi bhavet paratma yadyantavattvat parinami bhavat dukkhatmakatvat vishayatva hetoho drashta hi drishyatmatayana drishtaha. And the final verse in this section will say, it is still a layer. The mind is not the Atman. The mind is only a layer. And so this verse says why the mind is not the Atman. The layer of the mind also, like the earlier two layers, the layer of the body and the layer of the prana, cannot be the Atman because, one, it begins and it ends. In other words, it's present in waking and dream, it's absent in deep sleep. And because it has a beginning and it has an end, it cannot be the Atman, because Atman is birthless and deathless. It is changeable, yes, because the contents of the mind change all the time. The desires, hopes, ideas that we have are changing all the time. And therefore, the mind is not the Atman. It is the cause of suffering. Now, that's pretty obvious. And because it is an object of perception, the witness, the Atman, is the one perceiving the mind. Because how do we even become aware of the mind? Because the awareness, which is pure Atman, because of the Atman, we know that the mind is there. So there is a perceiver, there is a witness of the mind. The mind itself is not the witness, and therefore it is not the Atman. So this brings us to the end of this section on the layer of the mind. So when we meet next week, we'll go to the next layer, which is called the Vijnanamaya Kosha. But if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions about what we have seen up to this point, you're welcome. Yes, Chandi?
Namaskar, Maharaj. You told about the mind who is influenced by Maya. So, ignorance. And you said mind is an enemy or a friend. So same mind works as enemy, and then again it works as a friend and gives freedom. Is it the influence of Vidya Maya with the blessings?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you could say that the mind that is a friend is Vidya Maya. Because mind is a product of Maya. But if it can take me towards knowledge, towards freedom, then it is Vidya Maya. And the mind that is an enemy, it's an Avidya Maya. Very good. Yeah, good you brought it up, because those are the words Sri Ramakrishna uses in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. How Maya can be seen of as two: Maya that leads to freedom and Maya that leads to bondage. And therefore we can see the mind that is friend and mind that is enemy as standing for those two. Very good. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, you said that the mind is the only thing that we bring life after life, which we get the birth, because we can't get rid of it until we get the moksha. So if mind is, whose mind I'm bringing? Because if my last life was a bird, so that mind because the bird has mind too. So I don't know which life I'm getting and which mind I'm bringing. And just now you said mind is a product of Maya. So if I look deeply, so that means there is no mind at all. There is no bird, there is no tree, which last life I think that I don't know what life I had and what life I'm going to get it. So what is this mind? Is it Maya? Nothing else? There is like a,
the mind is a product of Maya, and everything that I have experienced in my last life, those impressions, those samskaras are there in the mind even now. All the samskaras are in the deep unconscious part of our mind. And for most of us, we have no access there. It's like in the mental basement. And yogis, or people who have acquired that ability to look deeply into that mental basement, can bring up those old samskaras and identify them. That is why in Yoga Sutra they say that if we really want to, we can remember our past birth. It is possible to do it. Because all those impressions are there right now, at this moment. Everything is there. So first of all, we don't have access there. We don't have the password, we can say. So if we can get those samskaras out and look at them and say, oh, so last birth I was this, I was that. It's possible. Is it something we want to do it? I don't think so. Because I think life is complicated as it is right now. Now, remembering our last birth is not going to make it any simpler. It's going to make it even more complicated. So there is no, from a spiritual standpoint, there is no benefit at all in knowing about the last birth. In fact, what to speak about last birth? This birth itself, we don't remember everything. Because so many things have happened in our life this birth. And some simple things like, what did I have for breakfast 20 years ago? I don't know, but I did have a breakfast. Even that memory, samskara is still there. If I can somehow think deeply what I was doing, I say, oh, now I know I had cereals that day. So it's possible, but why? I mean, what great discovery I'm going to make? So to answer your question, the mind is the same. With the same mind that goes from one life to another, whether it is in Chandralok, Brahmalok, wherever, except that all those samskaras, trillions and gazillions of them, are there in the mind. Only certain samskaras become activated, which are needed for that birth. So sometimes, for instance, we can say, sometimes we see these ducks along the river. Now, when these ducks give babies, those babies, we never see the mother teaching the babies how to swim. After some time, the babies become big and they go and start paddling. We need so much time to learn swimming. And so what it means is that we were all ducks in, we have had many millions of births. So in some birth, I was a duck. Now, if I'm reborn, and if I'm reborn in a duck's body, then my mind, which is the same mind I have now, will be there in me as a duck. So, but in the duck's body, the previous samskara of swimming will get activated. So no one will need to teach me, or I will be able to learn it very quickly because I have swum like that before. That's one way people try to explain how there are certain things we learn instinctively and certain things we need to be taught. But the mind is the same thing. Because mind is provides the continuity between the last birth and this birth. Otherwise, where will all these samskaras be stored if every birth I have a different mind? And so this is one of the important things to remember, that in every birth we have a different body, but we have the same mind. And when the mind dies permanently, we are liberated. So moksha, death means the death of the body. Moksha means death of the mind. Once the mind is dead, the samskaras are dead, the karma is gone, there is no reason to be born again then afterwards. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, Anish?
Swamiji, you mentioned something about unreal bondage and unreal freedom, and then real freedom. So about being on the relative plane. That only on the relative plane you can solve unreal bondage with unreal freedom. But then there's the plane of real freedom. In terms of having true freedom, I believe, as discussed in the Vivekachudamani, they're talking about us achieving true freedom. And so I guess my question is, in order to achieve true freedom, in the relative plane, if you feel like you're under too much bondage, like say you're in a war-torn situation, it might not be easy to follow a spiritual path that takes you towards real freedom. So even on the relative plane, is it better to try to become relatively free so that we're then able to achieve true freedom?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if we can find a way to create an environment around us which is more congenial for our spiritual progress, of course we should strive for that. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
So maybe one more question about mind. You said mind is a pet we have to train. So in the waking times we can think of doing activities which are like doing prayers and going to temple. Is there a way we can train mind to have good dreams? Because dreams we do have no control.
Yes, good question. And yeah, so I think the best way is, let's first try to control the mind and train the mind when we are awake. So let's not bother about dream right now. Let's focus on what we can do. And I think if we are able to do the job well about training the mind in the waking state, then it will become easier to train the mind in the dream state also. So it's better to begin with what we can do. Let's begin with although training the mind even in the waking state is quite a tough thing, but at least it is a little bit easier than training the mind in the dream state. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, even when we are training the mind in the waking state, how do you know this is the waking state? Right? I mean, this could be a dream also. So you are really training the mind in the dream state, isn't it? So these are the two ways you can look at it. They say yogis, by yogis is meant those who have attained that kind of a control and discipline of the mind. They can even control what kind of dreams they want to have, or if they don't want to have dreams. So that power is possible. It is possible to do it. But we need to reform the mind a lot more. The kind of a subtlety needed to do that comes. But the first step toward that is first training the mind in the waking state. So eventually that will be possible. Okay? Anything else? Oh, nice.
Swamiji, I think you mentioned that those who have really good meditation, are really good at doing meditation, require less sleep just because of the rest they get. Swamiji, is the reverse true? Meaning...
those who have bad meditation will need more sleep?
No, not so much that, but it's that if I am still requiring as much sleep, that means my meditation is not as good.
Or it also means you are working too hard. That feels good, right? Yeah.
Because
I mean, it's like this. I mean, one cannot kind of make a very mathematical connection that way. But I think whether we are having a good meditation or not, we will know deep inside our heart. And then we'll be able to make that correlation. Because when we see the life of Swami Advaitananda, or many of these direct disciples of Ramakrishna, we don't see them sleeping for long hours. And yet they were always fresh and this thing. So from where did that energy come? And it's not just them. I mean, you see that in the lives of great mystics and saints also. And so there is truth to that. And we will know, eventually we will know from our own experience, that on the days, even in our own little way, on the days that we have a good meditation, we will feel ourselves a little bit lighter. We will feel more fresh. On the days when we have not been meditating well, we just feel more heavy. We feel more like an inertia. So it's something that we'll all experience one way or the other, sooner or later. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so we will stop here today. So when we meet next week, we'll begin with verse 184 and start the section on the layer of knowledge, the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So although the Guru Purnima is today, according to the lunar calendar, we'll be celebrating at the center on Sunday at 11 o'clock. We'll have a small puja, we'll have music, we'll have a brief reflection. So all of you are welcome for the Guru Purnima on Sunday at 11. Next week we'll continue this study, and on Saturday we'll have our meditation as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.